Everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at haloconsulting, a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago. And we provide a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo is founded to provide the process-oriented best practices our team developed at top executive search firms with a cost-conscious scrappiness you'd expect from a boutique or startup. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we hope you're interested in joining our future events. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function in the toolbar, and we will address those questions at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will have a recorded version of this event available on YouTube. For now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marlon Moore. We are joined by Dr. Marlon Moore, president of Marlon Moore Consulting, LLC. In fact, today is Marlon Moore Consulting's one-year anniversary. Congratulations on your first year, Marlon.
Thank you.
Marlon's mission is to change the world with practical, leading-edge solutions that foster innovative and equitable cultures, empower diverse talent, and elevate inclusivity through leadership. Dr. Moore assists organizations and diversity professionals with strategic objectives designed to create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces and communities. A nationally recognized diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, Dr. Moore has trained thousands of business professionals on the principles of DEI throughout New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Ohio. He has authored several articles for Savoy and Kaleidoscope magazines and received recognition from Black Enterprise Magazine, National Diversity Council, Disability Equality Index, Forbes, and Fortune 100. He is also the author of Diversity Starts With You, a strategy development guide for DEI. Marlon earned a bachelor's in psychology from Virginia State University, a master's in diversity management from Cleveland State University, and a doctor of philosophy in organizational leadership from Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So Marlon, the first question we'll address, in the introduction, you talk about your first personal experience with racism 41 years into your life. Unfortunately, this may come as a surprise to some readers. Can you tell us about your life, especially growing up, and why you think it took 41 years before you encountered such explicit racism? Were there moments in your life upon further reflection where you experienced implicit bias without recognizing it?
Thank you, Douglas. So good morning for some, good afternoon for others. Douglas, thank you again for having me, and appreciate the shout out, one-year anniversary for Marlon Moore Consulting. It's really a great time, and thank you for allowing me to share more about my new book in this roundtable. So to answer your question, first of all, I'm thankful that it only took 41 years, or that I could go through the majority of my childhood and adulthood without experiencing racism. I mean, that's something that no one ever wants to experience. I think for me, though, over the years, I grew up in a very urban area, went to school in a rural area in Petersburg, Virginia. So there were some bouts of, I'd say discriminatory behavior just being in the South, but nothing major. I think my real first experience with bias, quite honestly, was when I entered the workforce, around the 20 or so age. So it was somewhat the age diversity experience where, I'm thinking I'm ready to go. I got a 4-year degree, and I'm ready to make a difference. And it was oftentimes, well, hold on, slow your roll and work your way up, and you'll eventually get to the places you want to be. So, I didn't always see that for other groups. It seemed like there were more opportunities that were readily available for non-minorities. So I think age diversity was probably where I experienced my initial bout of implicit bias.
Were there any moments in your life upon further reflection where you experienced implicit bias without recognizing it?
You know what? Fortunately, Douglas, I can't say that I have. If I did, it wasn't anything that made a significant impact for me, and I'm blessed that's my reality, being an African-American male. To be honest, I've experienced it more as a Ph.D. recipient. than I have based on my race. So I'm fortunate in that way, but it's not to suggest that it hasn't occurred.
Okay. You talk about the necessity of becoming self-aware and understanding one's own worldview. How would you describe yourself and your worldview, and how would you say it was formulated?
Yeah, so, I think the incident, and I talk about it early in my book, where I was called the N-word, where I live in my neighborhood. And, I've always sort of been in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, but that really made me double down on this word. I recognize there are a lot of ignorant people in society and people who don't really want to see representation or inclusion or equity. And so that's what really inspired me to write the book. After George Floyd was murdered, there's a lot of conversation that took place about what can we do? What can companies do? What can people do? And so the book is really designed to just give a roadmap of actionable steps and reflection that should take place as it relates to this work. So for me, Douglas, it's really about ensuring equity in society. I mean, that's it. I want my young nieces to be able to play with, your nieces, your relatives. I want to be able to ensure that all people can be empowered. My worldview is equity equals empowerment. That's my belief system. I was reading a book not too long ago, and it talked about in 1638, Europeans were offered the opportunity to come here through what was called the headright system. And they were given land, 50 to 100 acres of land, just to come here and help cultivate. Well, who did they use to cultivate the land? Oftentimes it was Blacks who came over here from slavery. And so when I think about the corporate structure today and the workforce at entry levels, who's really making the world go around? And oftentimes it's women, oftentimes it's ethnic minorities. And I want to be sure that we all have an opportunity to participate in an equal way in the workforce and society.
Great, thanks for sharing that context, Marlon. In chapter 2, you emphasize the importance of organizations having a DEI statement, but who should draft it and how should it be drafted to ensure the formulation of the document itself reflects the DEI stance a company intends to take?
Yeah, I think it's so important to have, some call it a commitment statement, a policy statement, whatever the term is, there needs to be an official statement that underscores an organization's commitment to this work. And it should be really divided in 3 parts. It should talk about what's important, why it's important, and who's going to execute. And typically that should be drafted with input from a number of stakeholders, any affinity groups, diverse leaders in the organization, senior leaders. If the organization has a marketing and communications team, they should definitely have some input. But more importantly, that statement should reflect the most senior individual in your organization, whether it's your president, CEO, even on the nonprofit side, it can include your board chair. But that statement sends a signal to the broader community that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to your organization. And oftentimes, if you're looking to recruit talent, prospective candidates will go look for that. To see where you stand on diversity, equity, inclusion, and how you're living up to what you say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Marlon. In chapter 2, you also touch on how should organizations prioritize their areas of opportunity for DEI before formulating their DEI operating plan, especially if there are multiple gaping holes.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Douglas. And I look at it in 2 parts. And really, that's what Marlon Moore Consulting was started from. It's how do you move from aspirational remarks, comments to action? So you start with your DEI commitment statement, and then you should develop, I highly encourage developing a DEI operating plan. And that's simply, your operating plan is, where do you want to move the needle in this space? Is it your supplier spend? Is it your workforce? Is it your philanthropic giving? Maybe it's your community engagement. But that's the first question you ask yourself. Where do we want to be better at? And then your operating plan should consist of strategic objectives with strategic initiatives to get you where you want to be. And then lastly, you want to ensure you have accountability metrics. I like to call them accountability metrics versus goals to measure progress over time. I tell most of my clients that this is not a quick fix. This is something that you won't see the results you want within a year. It's a journey. It's at least 3 to 5 years to put systems and structures in place to get buy-in. Hopefully after year one, any organization or most organizations will see progress, but it takes time. So move from aspiration to action, go from commitment statement to operating plan with strategic objectives, initiatives, and accountability metrics.
And Marlon, it looks like we had a couple of questions come in. Can you mention again the event that happened in 1638?
So it was called the Head-Right System. And it was a time period where individuals from Europe came to this colonized land. Many have heard the stories how Native Americans sort of, owned the land here, and it was taken for them. And so to help cultivate the land that was taken, Europeans were given anywhere from 50 to 100 acres of land to build up the United States. And actually, I read it in a book recently. I'll put it up. It's How White Folks Got So Rich, the untold story of American white supremacy. So I can put it in the chat, but it's been a really, really great read.
Great, thanks, Marlon. A couple of other questions coming in. Is your operating plan detailed for given years?
Great question. So an operating plan should usually give you a 3 to 5 year time frame in which to measure progress. A lot of that operating plan is really contingent upon the metrics, the DEI strategic objectives that are set, but your plan will include key core elements. A statement, commitment statement, your metrics, and we'll talk about some of this later, but your recruiting strategy. It should also include a communication plan and how you plan to really build culture by honoring various cultural and heritage months. So it's a very comprehensive document. It's your North Star, it's your guiding map. It's every day you get to work and you're looking to execute, you can go back to that plan for that guidance.
And follow-up question, Marlon. This individual mentioned that they get concerned when I hear the word commitment. I feel too many companies and executives are in this space for a feel good or check the box. Any context to share on that?
Yeah, so that's a fair question, and thank you for putting that out there. Commitment statement, to be honest, Douglas and the participant who raised that question, is really a softer way of saying policy statement. I tend to advise my clients not to use policy statement just because of the legal ramifications, and it seems more compliant based. Commitment statement seems more, for me, more competitive advantage related. And so the commitment statement is just something that you share internally, you share it externally on your website, but the real work is your D&I operating plan. And so a commitment statement without a formalized plan is just words and can become a check the box scenario. And so, in my business, I really, I love training. I tell folks, that was one of my first passions, love it. But if an organization is just looking to do training, I'm somewhat hesitant because I think the real work is in the strategy.
And you mentioned that the operating plan is really what should be the north guiding star. We had another question come in, and it mentions, does the statement need to be separate or independent, or can the values be incorporated into other formal statements such as the mission statement or the vision statement?
Yeah, great question. I think every organizational mission and vision statement should have inclusive language in it. Words like representation, inclusion, equity, empowerment, celebrating differences. I think that goes a very long way and deepening one's organizational and personal commitment to this work. And so, a DEI commitment statement should stand alone, but I think it's strengthened when you can see alignment between an organization's commitment statement and also their mission, vision, and values. It's a great question.
And the last question we'll cover, and we'll get back on track.
No, this is great. Keep them coming, Douglas.
How do we engage and empower white males to see equity as part of their work in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space?
Yeah, it's another great question. Another book I highly recommend, it's called Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive and Engaging Workplaces by Karen Caitlin. It's a great book that talks about allyship. And one of the ways that I think white males or non-minorities in general can be allies in this work is to be scholars. You have to educate yourself on what the challenges are for underrepresented groups. I recall before I became a chief diversity officer, I was a Black male who joined our women's business resource group. So I can educate myself on the challenges that they face in the workplace. And so I think white males can do the same, whether it's joining an African American group, an Asian group, whatever the dimension of diversity is, they have an opportunity to remove roadblocks and be a champion for this work. Again, we know the statistics, the census data has been out, but we also know who holds the majority of the leadership roles in organizations, and it's typically white males. And I think they have a huge opportunity to advance this work by being engaged.
Great, thanks, Marlon. And in the same vein, you say affinity groups should not be exclusive and that they should exemplify membership and participation representing all colleagues. And you even note on your own experience about joining a women's business group as a Black male. How does one maintain the integrity of an affinity group's designation while also aligning with the inclusivity component of DEI? We also asked this in our most recent roundtable about employee resource groups. And is there such thing as whitewashing or ally washing an affinity group?
Yeah, great question. So just to level set or use common language. So you mentioned employee resource groups, affinity groups. Some organizations call them business resource groups, but they're all designed to align with some dimension of diversity. I think that, to be honest, I think that affinity groups, traditionally, you'll have the membership based on the dimension of diversity. That will normally be the overwhelming membership. But I think there's power, as I mentioned before, in having individuals who are not a part of that group to join in and support. I mentioned joining the women's group. Douglas, there were things that I just didn't recognize that they were faced with. I didn't recognize the importance of, parental leave, work flexibility. I didn't recognize that there are a lot of women who are not just, may have a partner or a husband, but they're caring for an elderly parent. Those are some of the challenges that they face. To hear personal stories about how women in the workforce didn't feel empowered by their male supervisor. It's just something that opened my eyes. And so when I had an opportunity to make a difference and support those initiatives as a Black male, I was able to, and I was willing to. And so I just think that the more representation you can have from other groups, that the stronger an organization can be in moving forward. Now, as it relates to the affinity group, again, I'm all for inclusion, right? And equity. And so while an African-American group will more than likely have African-American members, I think it's important not to exclude other groups to really promote true inclusion.
And we also asked in our most recent roundtable about the employee resource groups, is there such thing as whitewashing or ally washing an affinity group?
Douglas, I don't think so personally. Others may have a varying point of view, and that's the power of diversity, is to get that. But I don't think so. I think the more allies that we can create, the better off we are.
Excellent. Thanks for that context, Marlon.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to people who may call the need for language in your contract with a search firm that requires a percentage of referrals to be diverse as a quota?
I'd say great job. Great job. So I wouldn't use quota, but I think the power and the leverage that an organization has with search firms is to include language to ensure that you have diverse slates. I think that helps an organization to make sure that that search firm is really executing or aligning with that organization's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. I've seen it too many times where a search firm can say, sure, we'll put diverse candidates in front of you and you get that first or second slate and it's not diverse. And it's hard to go back and say, well, wait a minute, I thought when we interviewed you, that was a part of how you recruit. So if you have that language in your contract up front, it helps to level set expectations. Douglas, I love what you all do at haloconsulting and being a minority-owned search firm and really leading with how you go about identifying diverse talent, but every organization won't have that same focus and commitment. So I encourage all organizations, to the extent that it makes sense, to have that language up front so you can hold that search firm accountable for ensuring diverse candidates, which ultimately, hopefully, should lead to hiring diverse talent.
Couldn't agree more, Marlon. We had a question come in from the audience. What led you to your decision to leave corporate America and start your own firm?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that. It was a tough decision, and I made it a year ago today, but it was the best decision I could have made. You know, I had a wonderful ride at my former employer. I had a lot of support from the board, the CEO, the leadership team, but I was working for that one organization, and I recognized that there's hundreds of organizations that really need support and doing what I described earlier, developing commitment statements, developing an operating plan. And if I truly wanted to make a difference in society, I felt like I had to get out here and work with hopefully hundreds of corporations and nonprofits to support them along this journey. And that was my goal. I've had a phenomenal first year, have had great partners that I've been able to support, but the goal is to reach as many people as I can to make a difference, to ensure that those in the workforce have opportunities to grow, that they're heard, that they're seen, and that as a society, we embrace these true principles and constructs that ultimately make us a better country. So my goal was to get out here and mix it up and try to make a difference.
Marlon, in chapter 3, you discussed diversity, equity, and inclusion pipeline strategy and how it supports the efforts of the overall talent acquisition strategy. Can you touch on the importance of having a strong DEI pipeline strategy and the 3 different components that you cover?
Yes, as much as I love chief diversity officers, if you're on the phone or on the Zoom, you are it. I appreciate you for what you do, but at the end of the day, our partners are those in talent acquisition and those within the particular business, meaning the hiring managers. So I encourage organizations not to just go to your chief diversity officer and say, oh my, we have an opening, find me diverse talent. No. Well, not no, we want you to reach out to them too, but there has to be a strategy. So a talent management strategy should lend itself to colleague referrals. Who better to promote an organization than somebody who works in that organization? So we should always be reaching out to our colleagues to get potential candidates, hold meetings before positions become available. That way you can build relationships, you can have a chance to meet people and begin to insert them in your pipeline. So colleague referrals are great. The haloconsultings of the world as search firms are really great because they have extensive pipelines. And then I think it's important to partner with diverse organizations. Historically Black colleges and universities are great resources for talent. Even their alumni network is a great resource for talent. Partner with organizations like the National Black MBA, Hispanica. There's just a number of organizations that are really rich in diverse talent. And I think having a overall strategy as it relates to talent, even as you think about succession planning, Douglas, that's a major piece in moving individuals in your organization and providing opportunities for everyone, but specifically diverse talent. So there should be an entire talent management, talent development strategy, and recruiting strategy in this space. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I'm really passionate about that point because oftentimes chief diversity officers are held with the responsibility of all things diverse talent, and it's a partnership, and it's an equal partnership at that.
Thanks, Marlon. We had a question come in from the audience. How do you address the strategy in implementing and developing a DEI plan? For example, in some organizations, employees want to be involved from conception. In other instances, staff may feel like the organization should come to the table with some ideas and strategies for staff to react to, i.e. coming to the table empty-handed with no strategy can make it seem like they have not given any thought to real change.
Yes, I love that question, Douglas. Thank you for posing that, and thank you for the participant who addressed that. What I've found that works best, especially as a consultant, is when an organization has a internal workforce, or a internal work stream or group of leaders at all levels of the organization who are responsible for helping to usher in this strategy. And so my job has usually been to come in and work with that team of leaders. And again, they've been all the way up to board members, to the CEO have been a part of this group. And I recognize that you may not always get the CEO, but what you want are a group of individuals who has the voice, okay, of the organization and who can implement change and then have a true passion about this work. So my role as a consultant is not to come in and say, hey, here are your strategic objectives, here's your plan, go forth. But what I will do is work with that work group or that work stream to take them through a process of establishing strategic objectives based on what change they want to see. Once we have baked out the draft of that DEI operating plan, then that can be socialized with other areas of the organization to ensure buy-in. Once we've taken all of that feedback, then we move to finalizing the document. And then usually there's a rollout plan where we communicate with the board, the executive leadership, and then the entire organization. But yes, there should be a work stream. There should be some idea generation with the consultant or with the work stream, but there should also be an opportunity for others to provide some input as appropriate.
We had another question.
Great question.
We had another question come in from the audience, Marlon. We have a location in Boise where the population is 95% plus white population. Say we relocate someone of diversity, how do you support the inclusion piece? We can hire all day long diverse talent, but if they don't feel included, et cetera, they will leave. I think it is more talent management rather than talent acquisition, not diminishing the talent acquisition, of course, but how do you address that?
Yeah, I think culture is extremely important, organizational culture. So, I'm big on what's the language we use at the corporate level. And are we using the same language, let's say in Columbus, Ohio, that we're using in Boise, Idaho, or is it different just because of the difference in representation? And the answer should be no. What you hear me say out of a corporate office in DC should be the same in Montana. The other thing is you want to use artifacts, you want to use stories, you want to look at your marketing strategy. Everything that you put out internally and externally should reflect a culture of inclusion to what's on your walls, to how people can express themselves. If you don't have a critical mass and you're not able to establish let's say an employee resource group, you can establish, an inclusion council, which is a group of all different dimensions of diversity. And that group is designed to promote, inclusion. And I think that the individual who asked that question is right. If there isn't a sense of belonging, if there isn't a culture of engagement, if people can't bring their full selves to the workplace, I mean, I'm big on that. Who are you? What's the best that you have to offer? And if you can't be comfortable and bringing that to an environment, whether it's Detroit or Boise, then you're not going to stay there. And it's incumbent upon leaders to recognize that and make sure that there's systems and there's a culture in place that truly lives and believes in this work.
Thanks for your response, Marlon. Another question from the audience: how would you suggest engaging members of an employee resource group who don't understand the importance of allyship, specifically a Black resource group with white allies?
Yeah, so that's another great question. And this is just Marlon Moore's philosophy about this work. And I've learned a long time ago that it is impossible to change everyone's mind or heart. I tend to spend my time with those individuals who want to learn, who want to be engaged, who see the power of this work. Now, if I were at a company and say in a leadership role or whatever role, and there was an individual who just didn't believe in the power of the employee resource groups, the first thing I would do is have them attend an event. Affinity groups put on the most powerful events that you can think about in the organization. As a matter of fact, Douglas, at my former employer, shout out to Huntington Bank, the employee resource groups or business resource groups, they changed the company culture, to be honest. So we didn't, they were responsible for helping us track our spend with LGBT suppliers. They were responsible for ensuring that we had meditation and prayer rooms. Those business resource groups were responsible for ensuring that we had caregiver time off, where we could extend the same time off for fathers who are adopting or caring for an elderly parent. Affinity groups can overnight shape the culture of your organization. And I think that for anyone who's not a believer, I would say get engaged, have a voice, help them to move the needle, because they're always coming up with things that are going to make your organization better in most cases. And you just got to get engaged and help them to do that.
Great, thanks, Marlon. Another question from the audience: I know improving diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in the workplace is not a quick fix. Healthcare often moves at a ludicrous speed. So how do you balance knowing DEI is essential to change company culture with knowing the organization will likely be completely different in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so that's where I go to accountability metrics. Doug, I think it's important to understand, again, where are your gaps, where you want to move the needle, and put KPIs behind it. So if you're looking at your overall workforce, that's important. If you want to look at your overall workforce at various levels, executive, management, entry-level positions, you want to look at retention of your workforce. On the supplier side, you want to make sure that you're looking at your overall spend. Driving economic inclusion is important. But most organizations, if you really peel back the data and do an analysis of either workforce or supplier, you'll find that numbers are low, and those numbers don't change overnight. And so you have to put bold but attainable metrics in place to move the needle, whether it's over 3 to 5 years, which is about how long it'll take. But you want to be able to measure progress really and report it out on a monthly basis to your leadership team, on a quarterly basis to your board. But it stays a focus until you get to where you want to be. I've been a part of organizations that went from 2% diversity spend to over 20% diversity spend. We've gone from a 74-point engagement score to 88 points favorable. That all happened over time, but those things were in place to measure, and those were great indicators that we were making progress.
Follow-up question to your response, Marlon. How do you set goals, and how do you know what percentage of women, Hispanic, African-American, et cetera, is ideal?
Yeah, great question. Really great question. So one of the things I highly encourage is to have an annual goal setting process. And that's where you bring in all of your partners. So let's just use workforce, for example. And this normally should take place around October of any given year. So you want to bring in the head of whatever department you're setting the goal for. You want to bring in the HR business partner. You want to bring in talent acquisition, and you want to bring in your chief diversity officer. And you look at at least a year's worth of data, overall workforce, diverse versus non-diverse. You want to look at your attrition, what's the annual turnover rate? And so you also want to look at your footprint and what's the available labor market, all right? So if in a certain market, there's 16% diverse representation, ethnically diverse representation, then I think, you want to mirror that. And so you would look at what that labor market is, and then look at where you are and what your historical trends are. And then the last thing is you want to look at what the job openings are. What's you're going to have 5 positions open next year, 10 positions open, and then you have to set aggressive targets. And again, working with organizations like Halo, looking at how you refer colleagues, all those things can get you to a higher acceptance rate or hit rate, for lack of better terms, with diverse talent. But there's a process and a whole conversation that should take place. So to just recap, look at your available market, have a goal setting process where you look at historical data, and then you have to set targets based on what you feel is attainable. But it's a collective process that should include all those stakeholders that I just mentioned.
Great, thanks, Marlon. And this is a good segue into the next question. When people think of diversity, equity, inclusion, they often think about workforce diversity. Would you talk about the importance of supplier diversity and community engagement as part of an overarching DEI plan?
Yeah, so to go back to the book I read, it's not lost on me that African Americans weren't given anything that they were promised. Slave trade was really, if you sort of researchers have looked at the money, the dollars, it was a $5 to $23 trillion labor market. This country was sort of built on the backs of those who were underrepresented and oppressed. Supplier diversity is not, it's our way to repay, diverse groups for things that have happened. But what it is an opportunity for organizations to leverage ethnically and racial minorities and gender-owned companies, veteran, LGBT, and others, to really drive economic inclusion. If we want to see the wealth gap close in this country, when we invest in minority-owned businesses, we close that gap. And so economic inclusion and buying goods and services from minority-owned businesses is a really great way to give larger organizations an opportunity to, again, close the gap, move the needle, find very capable suppliers who can drive cost savings, who can offer cost savings, can also produce quality products and services in a timely manner. I mean, they can compete with anybody. I think we have an opportunity as a country, especially from a corporate perspective, to be honest, I'll just say it, to right some wrongs. And I'm not, saying all this to guilt any company into leveraging or utilizing a diverse business, but we can do a lot of good and receive a lot of positive benefits from just looking at our supplier base and making sure that it's representative of the communities we serve.
Thanks, Marlon. And in the same vein, in chapter 4 of your book, you discuss supplier diversity strategy and the importance of having support from the senior executives as well as the board of directors. Can you share with the audience some effective ways to engage and garner support from middle managers?
Yeah, so I think it's important to, to talk about the business case for supplier diversity. I mean, diverse suppliers bring in, over $1 billion in annual revenue. These are some large companies that can offer significant value as a part of anyone's supply chain. Statistics and research shows that diverse markets and diverse businesses tend to support companies that support them. And so if you want to drive market share, if you want to outperform your competitors, if you want to drive revenue, leveraging diverse suppliers as a part of your supply chain is a great way to do that. And so organizations can't look at it as a compliance sort of initiative. Well, the government says I should use a diverse business, or Marlin says I should use a diverse business. No, you have to understand that diverse businesses, just like diverse talent, drives innovation. It's a great way to differentiate yourself. It's a great way to tap into the buying power of diverse markets. It's a great way to retain talent. So those are all ways that if you communicate the power of that and the business case behind it, and it's not a chief diversity officer thing. It's not a supplier diversity director thing. It's not one individual. It has to be an organizational business practice. It has to be ingrained in your sourcing process. It just has to be something that is truly what your organization believes in and does on a daily basis. And I think that goes a long way from getting support. Having your board look at that on a quarterly basis matters. I used to share with some of my colleagues, hey, help me help you. I don't want to go to the board and show the numbers and your line of business is coming up short. So let's work together to do the work.
And Marlon, I think we might have covered this earlier in our conversation, but what are some examples of accountability metrics that organizations can use when diversifying their suppliers and or workforce? And which metrics do you focus on when evaluating an organization?
Yeah, so we did touch on it earlier, but just to reiterate, I think from a workforce perspective, you want to look at your diversity at all levels of the organization. If you all have access to your data, I'm sure you would find that the majority of your ethnic diversity, I like to say ethnic diversity versus people of color, but whichever you choose, is probably at the entry levels of your organization. It gets somewhat better in middle management, but at the executive level, it tends to sort of decrease. So just don't look at diversity overall because those numbers probably look good. Look at your board diversity and look at your executive level diversity. Then look at promotions. Look at promotions. You'll be surprised at how many lists come out and there's not a lot of representation either from a gender or ethnicity standpoint. So you want to measure overall workforce at various levels. You want to measure promotions. You want to measure retention. Okay, we can go out and get 70% diverse talent and 80% of that talent leaves, then there's probably an opportunity there. And then the other thing I would say is segment that data by various dimensions of diversity. You have to look at where you want to move the needle. You can't boil the ocean. A lot of organizations will start with gender and ethnic diversity because there's a process that you have to go through with other dimensions to make sure they're self-identifying, but you don't want to leave those groups out as well. So still, segment by sexual orientation, military status, and those with various abilities. But that's what I would look at on the workforce side. On the supplier side, you want to look at overall spend. You want to look at your diversity spend. On the supplier and workforce, I highly encourage you to segment that by the leadership of your organization. So there's accountability. So whether it's the head of IT, head of marketing, head of communication, all goals and metrics should be set at that level and then pushed down throughout the department. Back to the supplier side, you always want to analyze and track and measure the spend of your top 10 non-diverse suppliers and your top 10 diverse suppliers. And those are just some key metrics that can help you with your dashboards right away.
And Marlon, from an advisory council perspective, it seems like the need for an advisory council comes out of not having enough full-time dedicated DEI employees. Should there be more full-time DEI specialists?
I would be remiss if I didn't answer yes to that question. I think I tell, as much as I appreciate being hired as a consultant, I'm still advocating for every organization to hire a full-time diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, someone with experience in leading in this space, someone who has a passion for this. I think they should be provided a budget. I think they should, have the right title and should have the right reporting structure, whether that's directly to the CEO. I think that matters. But the reality is, in most instances, they are individual contributors. And so in that instance, I think the way you kind of extend your reach is by establishing an advisory council, internal advisory council. My experience has taught me to align your council with every department in your organization. For example, if I'm working with, let's say, technology, okay, and we're looking to move the supplier needle and the workforce needle, I need a single point of contact that I can go to and talk about spend data, workforce data, build recruiting strategies with. And so that individual is usually appointed by the executive of that department. So for example, the chief information officer or chief technology officer appoints a point of contact to represent their line of business on the advisory council. Now I have two accountability partners, the head of technology and my point of contact. And anything I need to get done, I have someone sitting around the table to support that. Now, Douglas, imagine doing that by 10 other departments. And so now it's not just about Marlon moving the needle, it's about that advisory council that has strategic objectives, that have accountability metrics, that should be reporting to their head on a monthly basis. Now we're all collectively engaged in the process of accelerating our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And for those out there that may have different stakes that you're in and various departments, you can form an advisory council that has representation from those particular areas as well. So I've seen advisory councils where you'll have a regional president that's a part of that council. You'll even have, to be honest, Doug, members of the affinity groups at the table as well. What I love about it is it creates competition because, as you structure your meetings, you have each one of those departments report out on what they're doing to advance DEI. And you start getting some really good report outs, and that sort of ups the ante for folks to really move the needle.
And Marlon, follow-up question, will there always be a need for an advisory council like the one you described in the book?
Hopefully there won't be a need for any chief diversity officers. In an ideal world, there doesn't have to be someone who's sort of standing over you saying, what are we doing in the DEI space? How you recruit talent and how you onboard diverse suppliers as a part of your supply chain, that should be a normal part of business, just like customer service is, just like IT support is. DEI should be a normal part of how we operate. So to that extent, no, I think that there should not be a need because, again, there's this level of integration. I think the reality is there will be a need for chief diversity officers. And I think that to gain organizational support, an advisory council is a very strategic way to do that. And so I highly encourage organizations to consider doing that.
And we had a question come in from the audience, Marlon. Do you include HR in the DEI Advisory Council?
Great question. Absolutely. They are, if that's a business unit, they are responsible to be a part of that. And just to elaborate on that point, at my former employer, I was a part of the HR leadership team, and I invited every person on that leadership team to be a part of the advisory council. Not just, my point of contact. We needed learning and development at the table. We needed compensation at the table. We needed the head of the HR business partners at the table. We needed the head of talent management at the table. So that was another strategic step that I took, so that when business units had challenges, we were all hearing it at the same time. And so that learning piece is important. So you want them at the table. The recruiting and succession planning piece is important, and you want them at the table. So hopefully the theme here is about partnership and collaboration to advance the work. That was a great question.
And Marlon, when we think about the advisory council, is appointment by the executive leaders the best way to establish a diversity advisory council?
It's another great question. It's a start, because everyone they appoint may not be the best person for the advisory council. There may not be the commitment. To be honest, they may not be senior enough. So I think two things you want to look at. Who does that leader want to hold accountable for the work? You want their suggestion. Usually that goes over well. But if that doesn't work, the second thing, Douglas, I think is important is who's passionate about the work. I want to partner with somebody that I don't have to chase down and get information or, bug them to come to a meeting. They see DEI as a strategic business imperative for an organization, and they just have a very intrinsic motivation to move that organization forward. So I look at sort of who's being recommended, but also who has a passion for the work and can, at the end of the day, help us get things done, because that's what it's about, outcomes.
The last question pertaining to the advisory council: how can members of the advisory council ensure they are receiving transparent, helpful feedback from their stakeholders, being either employees, suppliers, et cetera? Are these surveys, or are there any best practices you would set up?
So from an advisory council standpoint, there are a couple of things that I recommend. This group is meeting quarterly. I would recommend that you invite your president, executive director, or CEO, the senior most individual in your company, to your last meeting of the year. What that does is give he or she or them an opportunity to hear what that group is doing, answer any questions they may have, and assure alignment. Another best practice is the work should continue outside of the quarterly advisory council meeting. And here's what I mean. Where I've seen the best results is when that individual who's on the advisory council goes back to their department or business unit or line of business, whatever you may call it, and meets with the leadership team of that group. So that meeting consists of going over that segment's data. It talks about the challenges that they may have. They're going to do a report out on what other businesses, departments are doing across the organization, and they're going to get their input and buy-in on the overall strategy for the company and for that department. So it's just not about attending a meeting and doing a report out, but it's about taking what you heard, what you've learned, back to your business to ensure that everybody is bought in.
Great, thanks, Marlon. I'm going to pass it over to you so you can share some information on your firm. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, Douglas, again, thank you so much. This is my second roundtable, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. I encourage all those who may be on the line and those who hear this recording to reach out to Halo Halo Consulting as a part of your talent acquisition process. Marlon Moore Consulting was designed to do simply two things, or three things. One, to help organization reach their goals as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. To do that from a strategic planning perspective, and to be collaborative, to leverage 16 years of best practices, industry experience across multiple industries to move the needle. It's about moving from aspiration to action. It's about saying, moving from, well, what can I do? Would love to support this, this strategic initiative, but I don't know how. It's about getting involved. It's about setting strategic objectives. It's about having strategic initiatives. It's about having key performance indicators. It's about creating a culture of inclusion. It's about having engagement surveys. Marlon Moore Consulting is designed to help you and your organization do exactly that. It's about having difficult conversations. We're trained in group facilitation. We're able to lead powerful discussions that may sometimes get emotional, but all of that is great for one's organizational culture. So I'm excited. The book is out. I saw a few of you have ordered it. Thank you so much for your support. The official book launch is this Thursday here in Columbus, Ohio. Then we'll also be going to Warrensville, Ohio in September, on September 25th, and then Virginia State University, my alma mater, a historically Black college and university, on October 22nd. So again, Douglas, thank you so much for all you do. And thank you everyone who joined and took the time to engage with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marlon. And special thank you for everyone joining, and a very special thank you to Dr. Marlon Moore. Feel free to connect with Marlon via LinkedIn or email, and don't forget to check out Halo's previous events on our YouTube channel. We will keep everyone updated about our future events, and we will be sharing a survey out early next week to get your feedback as we continue to reiterate for future events. And again, appreciate everyone joining, and have a great week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.